Tax Sutra and Law Street India, and it's always a pleasure to host a senior advocate in Venkatraman. May I request everyone to please put your video or to put your video on mute? May I please request? I think it will collectively save bandwidth. Venkat sir's video, of course, will be on. As I said, it's a delight to be hosting Venkat sir. He's appeared in several of our conferences, on several of our webinars, and Venkat sir is an absolute treat to listen to on any topic, and there is a reason for it. The reason being that that the sort of preparation that he does, the thought of editorial thought leadership, the thought leadership that he brings to the table. I shouldn't say editorial, that's us, but the sort of thought leadership that he brings, the original thinking that one would associate with Venkat sir. I have been lucky to have listened to him on so many occasions, and this is an offbeat topic. Usually, we've had the privilege of listening to Venkat sir on topics like GST, which is his favorite topic, on international tax, permanent establishments, but he's taken a fascination for cryptocurrencies. I don't know how much he holds of it, but he's fascinated by it, and I must say that my journey with Bitcoin does not involve any investments. I was almost tempted to invest in Bitcoin when I think it was trading at, someone told me, some $7,000-8,000. But I don't know what it is trading at right now. I haven't had a look at it in a while. When it crashed, I think a lot of people lost the fascination for it. But once again, it is in news, I think. And one of the reasons being, when I was talking to one of my genius friends in California with whom I went to school, and he told me, Arun, watch out for Bitcoin again, that there could be a moment exacerbated by a global economic crisis, by this pandemic. It could actually lead to people moving back to Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. And the judgment that we are going to talk about is a 180-page judgment delivered by a 3-judge bench of the Supreme Court recently, on whether cryptocurrencies, the history of cryptocurrencies, how they originated, what the world over everyone is doing, what the countries are doing, how they are grappling with it, what are the risks associated with these cryptocurrencies, how are different regulators across the world looking at cryptocurrencies. The petitioners, of course, in this case, assailed the power of the RBI, the circular issued by the RBI, banning the virtual currencies. Essentially, the Bitcoin, the petitioners assailed it on several scores, including, the challenging the very power of the RBI to regulate the cryptocurrency market, on the colorable exercise of power test, on the malice test, on the MS Gill test, and finally on the balance of proportionality. On what grounds did they finally strike down the circular is something that I would leave to Venkat sir to say, except that Justice Ram Subramaniam, the learned judge of the Supreme Court, has really written a very erudite judgment, and he captures it beautifully in the end by saying that we could not have had a better nail-biting finish to this case. I would like to read only one line, one para from this judgment on justice. The way Justice Ram Subramaniam goes to the cryptocurrency founder, to the Bitcoin founder, and what was his logic to come up with the Bitcoin. And I'll read this out, the 4 lines, and then hand it over to Venkat sir. The root problem with conventional currency is all the trust that is required to make it work. The central bank must be trusted to not to debase the currency, but the history of fiat currencies is full of breaches of that trust. It is the lack of trust in the currencies that we deal in day in and day out that led to an alternate currency market, the digital currency that we know, the Bitcoins that we know. I hand it over to Venkat sir, my talented colleague Aditi Bhide, who drives our corporate law portal, Law Street India. She is also on the call, and she'll put some questions to Venkat sir once he's through with this analysis of the judgment. It's an erudite judgment, and you will have a scholarly analysis from none other than senior advocate N. Venkatram. Venkat sir, absolute pleasure to be hosting you. We almost have 350, 400 participants, on a Thursday morning. Thanks so much, sir, for joining in for this. Over to you, sir. I request everyone to please put your video on mute except Venkat, sir. Thank you so much.
Mala Sudha Kumbha Vibodha Mudra Vidyavirajat Karavari Jatam Apara Karunya Sudhambura Shimshri Sharadhambam Pranatosmi Nityam. Thank you, Arun. Thank you, Aditi. It's a pleasure to be here to talk to our known friends and well-wishers on a fairly important, interesting, and intriguing subject today. See, when the judgment got delivered, the understanding given by the media and many who gave interviews, they came about saying that Supreme Court has quashed the RBI circular on proportionality. So what would that mean? The inference drawn by the general public, even by bankers, when we were talking to them, they all felt very well. Supreme Court has now allowed virtual currencies to be part of the Indian currency market. It has blessed virtual currencies, and therefore now virtual currency is going to be part of our monetary system because the RBI circular has been quashed. This is the assumption many carried because of the last paragraph of the finding, which went to quash the circular on the limited ground of proportionality. But if you see that 179 pages anterior to that, the analysis made by the court, and as Arun was saying, by the learned judge, Honorable Justice Ramasubramanian, on behalf of the bench, had discussed several important pillar concepts, evolving concepts, and certain important judicial principles on managing fiscal systems and fiscal economics, none of which has seen much of the headlines, except possibly magazines and papers which deal finance as a theme portfolio for them, for their consumers. So the purpose of this talk is to understand and unravel the first 178 pages rather than the last 2 pages, which do not in any way signify or give an understanding 178 pages is only on proportionality and the circular is finally quashed. That will be an erroneous understanding of this judgment. This judgment has approved what RBI can do, has approved that RBI has a right to monitor VCs, has approved that the powers, it's very much within the powers for them to reach and do whatever is needed after taking the global understanding and the understandings of various regulators across the country. And it has divided the whole judgment into 3-4 important parts. Role of RBI as a regulator. And ending up with an analysis, RBI amongst the regulators is also unique. One is a broad-based analysis of what is regulatory power in India, amongst which RBI stands several footings above the rest. This is one important principle which one can derive out of this judgment. The second important principle which this judgment seeks to deliver is in balancing between regulatory power and absence of a subject directly falling within that domain, to what extent regulation can extend its arms. It is a very classic analysis, a very cautious approach, but an approach which has ensured that though VC normally is understood to be as not a legal tender, still is governed by a regulator. This is the second important analysis which this judgment seeks to bring about. The third, of course, is in two parts: the nuancing of administrative law qua regulation. For lawyers, especially young lawyers, you should read this judgment line by line for you to come to grips the fundamentals of administrative law, which all along has been impacting several executive functions and legislative functions. But when it comes, regulatory functions is not new to India. It's at least 25 years old, but 25, 30 years old in terms of active litigation. But this nuancing on administrative law under the regulatory ambit, it lays down certain important principles. How do you, see, for example, a tax authority charges, if you don't have a charge, then you are out of the ambit. Whereas when it comes to a regulatory authority, they have not applied that logic. They've said when a subject matter doesn't fall, but if it is concerning, then regulation can extend its arm there. This is a very important bridge which has connected and enabled regulators to reach out to areas where it can concern them. This connect has now been given judicially through this judgment. And of course, the fourth part, most important part, is about this proportionality test, which will come to that finally for 5 minutes, because it cannot occupy more time than that. There are more precious things to be discussed prior to that. See, all of us need to know, before we know what is cryptocurrency, we must first know very broadly what is blockchain technology. We have put 4 slides. I will run it through quickly, but what needs to be understood for today's discussion is, what is blockchain? Blockchain is, as we all know, in manufacturing industry, there is something called continuous process industry. Even under COVID conditions, those industries are all functioning. For example, a smelting plant or a copper extraction plant, it can't stop. If it stops, then the furnace, to restart the furnace will take 1 year, 6 months. So it has to run. It's prohibitive, cost prohibitive to stop the plants. So it is continuous, and every section anterior to it is looped with the subsequent sections that they flow as a seamless connect. Technology also has something like that, which we call it as a blockchain technology. 3, 4 important aspects needs to be understood in blockchain technology. 1, it is something which has interconnected blocks, and each block is capable of embedment of various transactions. This is first primary understanding. 2, the hash of one block will be interlooped to the subsequent block. And any disruption or hacking on one cannot allow them to penetrate to the next, because the layer will also reflect over there. That's why they say this Bitcoin it is very difficult to produce a counterfeit in Bitcoins. That's the assumption. Technology is technology, but today that's the assumption. And 3, they give you an electronic ledger, what they call the distributive ledger, where you can enter transactions on a real-time basis. And 4, it is an integration of several computers and technological interdependent internet and networks, which enable each, you can't disturb or distract one, and if you do that, rest of them also gets alarmed. And it's the vice versa also. All of them have to confirm together to ensure a transaction takes place. So this is the technology in which Bitcoins work. But what is most important is, this Bitcoin is not a tangible commodity. It's not a paper, it is an electronic key, that's all. So you have to have that electronic key, and you will manage to push those codes into it, and that will register. So it will have a sender, it will have a receiver, it will have a ledger of the transactions which will get document, And the transactional keys will pass technically to the other to say that the Bitcoin exchange has happened. This is how it works. And how do you get Bitcoins? You can't go and buy like a computer or a soap in the market. Bitcoin, they use the terminology, it is normally mined. So all these traders, all these online portals, if you go and click something, it's like a flying mile point. If you buy this, you will get a Bitcoin. It's something which they'll offer. So to that extent, you become the owner to that key. And to that extent, you become the owner to that value. So these are very rudimentary, fundamental principles on which it operates. Of course, there are high-end technical books on all these subjects to examine. But for us to understand, what bottom line is, this is not money as we have thought in our lives, but it has the power of money, and it has the power of money and something beyond money. That's the beauty of this Bitcoins or virtual currencies. Now, if you see, he was reading out from one of the authors, these are the judgment beautifully records who are all its creators. And the most important one is the penultimate bullet, Satoshi Nakamoto. He is an anonymous person even now, even appears to be the most active creator of Bitcoin. And he has passed on the information to Adam Back. And Adam Back, this is the statement of Adam Back, which the Supreme Court records in its judgment. What does he say? What does the creator feel about virtual currency? What we want is fully anonymous, ultra low transaction cost, transferable units of exchange. That if we get that going, banks will become obsolete dinosaurs they deserve to become. So it is virtually an extinguishment of the fiscal monetary discipline system of a country. This is what, and in fact, the judgment in a particular place beautifully says, this avatar is to kill banking industry. But the avatar wants an access to the banking industry and then kill the banking industry. And how do you say RBI cannot then regulate it? That's the question the learned judges pose to the councils who argued that we should be decontrolled. So this is the basis on which, this is the idea of the creators, right? But a creation doesn't stop only with the creator. It travels and it has its own effects. So some definitions, what cryptocurrency as understood across the world. I'm just putting a couple of things here. Important forums which have declared it so. See, FATFA, which is a very well-known international forum in France, which we are all now also very familiar with, especially the current situation. Now, FATFA clearly declares it has 3 out of the 4 properties of money. Because it can be a medium of exchange. You can go and exchange it to dollars or yen or Indian rupee. It is a unit of account. You can buy and sell. You can conduct transactions or enjoy services paying Bitcoins as a unit of account. And it has a store value. Money with you is always an asset. So it has that store value. So they say it has all the 3 properties, but it has not attained a legal status. It is not a legal tender declared so far. It stops there. Now, it also describes what is cryptocurrency, where it works on the protected technology. This blockchain is a genus. The species is Bitcoin, and Bitcoin works on the cryptographic technology, which is all completely automated in encryptions by computers with no manual interference. And therefore, they say there is no scope for any counterfeit or any fraud, or it is free from hacking. That's the presumption it proceeds to. Now, the regulators also say digital currency, virtual currency, digital currency, Bitcoin, they're all fairly synonymous and interchangeable terms. You can even say, in fact, India won, the judgment records in one place, India was towing the idea of bringing out a digital rupee. We'll have to discuss that at the end of the session. What that could be possibly a better idea. than a Bitcoin is something which I just wanted to float it for a thought process level. So it explains what is digital currency too. Then IMF also says it has all the three values. And when it comes to crypto, it says it has, this is how it operates, four values. Digital in nature, it's private, it's global, and it is autonomous and decentralized algorithm. Possibly a perfect picture, perfect analysis, definition of what a crypto money or a Bitcoin is. Now, what were the factors, they say, the judgment records, what allowed Bitcoins to first enter into market? There must be some reason. One, they attribute it to the technological evolution called the blockchain technology. That is one cause for it to emerge as in the global space as a medium of exchange or a store of value or a unit of account. But more importantly, they are talking about the subprime crisis of global meltdown of 2008. And that's why possibly now Giri hints, Arun says that COVID could be one more area where the re-emergence of Bitcoin can happen. It arose under this background. And all of us know, today is not a seminar on what is global meltdown, but we must understand global meltdown was one which activated what is called the process of derivatives. Now today's stocks are all plummeting. And then to say about derivatives, which the fate of it will be known with some certainty only when we all get out of this crisis to wake up and see what's the kind of damage and infliction it has made. See, derivative is it's a logic of selling a loss as an asset, selling a liability as an asset, and booking a debit into a credit. And it all depends on the underlying asset. God only knows what is the value of that underlying asset in most of the transactions. And you can keep, whenever you are in crisis, you can always shift it to somebody else and make it into a credit. This is the, I'm not putting it too simplistically, but if you go to the, penetrate it to the brass tacks understanding what is the derivative, it all originated because of that. Because they had huge liabilities which they had to commoditize it into an asset. And this is the source or the origin of derivative. And as long as the derivative will survive, as long as the underlying asset has a value intrinsically. In a share, it has better valuation norms, better valuation efficiency, and all those things, which may not be there because it's an element of gamble in derivative market. So derivative was one reason, and all of us know, any banker says derivative market is today in all over the world, anywhere between 70 trillion to 600 trillion. Each one is guessing their own, we don't know. But whatever it is, even if it is 70 trillion, if it's going to go for a toss, well, we are up to something. So that's one reason they say Bitcoins have emerged in the process. And of course, privacy concerns and political views of the government. Now, what is the progress report of virtual currencies? See, they are talking about three important aspects. In terms of technological efficiency and privacy, you have to give a tick mark to Bitcoin as on date, because there is on technological hacking, there are not much of material even placed before the court to say it is not a technologically viable one. But certainly, if the growth of Bitcoin is going to interfere and complicate monetary policy management of any nation. See, here I need to spend 2 minutes for you to understand. The local currency of any country is addressed by the Supreme Court by its common usage term, normally understood usage term called fiat currency, FI. So fiat currency is the currency which is legal tender. Now, if Bitcoin works in its own orbit and does not clash or interfere or penetrate or substitute, modify or kill fiat currencies, it's fine. But if it is going to do that, That's the point where any nation will feel alarmed. And therefore, some nations have taken the extreme step like China of banning it at the threshold. Some nations want to regulate. So some nations prohibit it. Some nations want to regulate it. Some nation, I'm going to show one or two countries, they have accepted this as legal tender. It's very, very interesting. In fact, one of the countries referred by the Supreme Court, I need to speak about it for 5 minutes. That is an area of concern. So different nations have different patronage to Bitcoins. So in India, it was wait and watch. And therefore, RBI thought that it should regulate. I'll give you the reasons for that in a minute's time. And which was challenged to say that this is not a subject matter which falls within the domain of RBI. That was a short and simple point. Then we'll come to proportionality finally, because that was an alternative relief that was sought for and they succeeded. But the main relief is something which they have not succeeded. That is something which has not come up clearly into the public's mind. So the concern about Bitcoins as they catalog, Supreme Court catalogs, what are all the concerns of a Bitcoin? Most importantly is the last bullet in this frame. It can actually augment resources for terrorist activities, terrorism, drug trafficking, any nefarious illegal activity. This virtual currency can form the basis of transaction. And if you are not going to control it, if it goes out of control, then will it be a parallel economy? It will be an economy which will virtually eclipse and supersede the existing economy. These are the concerns which FATFA has raised. Now, more important, so that's one reason. Terror financing is one area of concern, and they have brought out evidence saying that a lot of online agencies have allowed individuals to contribute Bitcoins. And when they have tracked down those transactions of Bitcoins, it has ultimately ended up in terror financing. They got material to say this, which has been, this has come out as a report based on material examination. Then the second point which is concerning is the last bullet. See, let's imagine our parents, grandparents, all retired pensioners. If they are going to say all will operate in Bitcoins, Bitcoins are low cost efficiency currencies, but they don't yield interest. So what happens to half of India, which lives on pension? And rest of the countries too. So this is one concern they have flagged off when you say that if we allow Bitcoin to be part of legal tender, what will happen to interest? Well, for somebody who has to pay, it's fine. But when somebody has to receive, and what will be the monetary aggregate in terms of the policy which can get finally affected? Then, therefore, at least in the Interdisciplinary Committee of India, the IDRBT is part of the Reserve Bank, they have not given this a status of coins or currencies. So they said three things. We therefore want to warn those who buy or sell or offer it as a platform of exchange to stop it. And in good faith, you should also exit from this. This was the recommendation by the Interdisciplinary Committee. And then they also said, ultimately, it should come through the process of a legislative change. It can't come through, each one is saying something. So it should be see, that is one concern which the Supreme Court has had also to comment upon. You have it. That's why I said it's a nuanced area in administrative law and regulation. Young lawyers who are hearing this should, when I come to that point, I'll highlight for 2 minutes on that aspect. So they are recommending legislative changes. And the MOF in the budget speech has only said, if it is illegal, we will try to, illegal finance, we'll try to ensure that steps are taken to eliminate. That's the statement. Therefore, does it otherwise permit the circulation of VCs? Is one question. And then again, the CBDT has also said there are too many players into it. Whatever you want to do, you have to do it slowly. and you have to do it. If you want to ban it, you can do it, but do it through a process of legislation. So it is the collection of or pool of all these thoughts which resulted in the present dispute because of a statement by the RBI on 5th April and the circular dated 6th April. And what does it say? It said three things. Entities regulated by RBI should not deal with virtual currencies. And if you deal with it, then you will not be provided any banking service. And see the list. That is why they applied proportionality, which will come later. So don't deal with VC guys if you earn by me. And if you attempt to do that, then we can cut your banking services. And those who are already providing the services exit within 3 months. This is what the circular sought to say. Once it said so, it was challenged, saying that it's not, goods will come to that. So it was challenged on several grounds, and the court deals each ground on its own merit and then disposes it off. But before doing that, it's time for us to understand what is the role, power, and function and responsibilities of the central bank in India. We must have a fair idea of that. Only then we can come to a conclusion whether they can control, monitor, supervise, or prohibit, or do anything with it. Whether is it at all a regulatory body which needs to deal with this new animal. Unless we have an idea about what this Reserve Bank is all about, then we will land up in a wrong area. So Reserve Bank, it has, the Supreme Court has catalogued close to 16 functions. But let's take the first two in this bullet and the last two in the next bullet. That's important for today. To operate the currency and credit system of the country to its advantage, to take over the management of the currency from the central government. See, this is a very, very important power. Supreme Court recognizes it. It says, this regulator is one creation. After it's being created, it gets liberated even from the creator. That's the power of RBI. It's a new reach in defining the powers of RBI. You create something and you say the created one is always susceptible to the creator. Even in philosophy, that's the point. But it's here, it says, you can disassociate yourself from the creator and control the creator to the limited extent of management of currencies. This is a power vested with RBI. Now come to the last two bullets. It's something which is likely to result in systemic risk and affect payment system, affect monetary policy, affect credit policy, affect public interest. Then RBI has a role to play. This, unless we understand this basic format, we will not be able to appreciate why Supreme Court held it so. Supreme Court held it so for the reason that it is not merely because RBI had power. You can, if you use your power in a wrong for a wrong cause, then interference is necessary. So first of all, it's our duty to understand the functions and responsibilities. So anything to do with systemic risk, which can affect payment system, monetary policy, credit policy, and public interest, then RBI can step in and has a role to play. Now, the questions which the petitioners raised before the Supreme Court was, well, RBI has no control over it because virtual currencies or bitcoins are nothing but goods or commodities or stocks. It has nothing to do with money, which alone comes under the purview of RBI. So they wanted the court to declare VCs or bitcoins to be or to go out of RBI's clutch. And the principal contention, see, this is exactly where the nuancing has happened by the Supreme Court. Young lawyers should closely read the judgment on your own to enjoy the connect and also understand it better. See, the contention, it's not that the petitioner made some faltu, useless contention, not at all. It's a contention grounded on law. What did they say? They said, look here, RBI has not recognized virtual currencies as a legal tender. Come what may, what its efficacies are. Having not declared it as a legal tender, it goes out of their purview. We are now supporting with the fact that it can never acquire the status of a legal tender because they are more in the nature of goods or commodities. So RBI should be kept out. That was the principal contention, which contention has been negative. This is very important. If you simply say it's all, now you for a minute reverse yourself and then think, if you read the headline news, Supreme Court quashes RBI circular, and now it says you have, it's even though it's not a legal tender, it's going to govern by it. What will happen to it? So this is the disconnect which has happened to many of the people who have understood this judgment. So they argued it is not a legal tender, it is goods, and therefore declare it to be outside the ambit of Reserve Bank. And now, therefore, what did Supreme Court do? Before it came to a conclusion, it has recorded a wonderful analysis, maybe assisted very well by the contesting parties. So they brought on record what each regulator understands Bitcoins to be and what most of the nations, important nations, understand virtual currency to be. And after extracting all the essence, Supreme Court in 2 passages has consolidated beautifully in sequence what does the regulator feel across the world and what do countries feel about virtual currencies, and comes to this conclusion. It is what I have now drawn in these bullets are the views of our court after examining the material. This is observation of the Supreme Court, not what the material placed before it, after considering the material. So they have this, it passes every time. Most of the countries have acknowledged the fact that it passes the triple test: medium of exchange, unit of account, and store of value. ECB says it is an unregulated digital money. ECB is a very important partner for India operations. IRS says it's the same manner as country's traditional currency, all the efficacies. And IMF, FATFA says you can treat this as virtual currencies as digital representations of value. SEC says we can even exchange it to dollar. It's capable of exchange. And crime agencies say in like a currency in some environments, though it may not have all the attributes of a real currency. See, in money laundering, it will be a big challenge whether this will be proceeds of crime. That's one challenge which one has to confront unless you decide regulator has an ambit on it or not. Now, widespread declare. Then Liechtenstein says it can again be exchanged for legal tender. What I'm interested in is this. See, German Federal Reserve says this, but Luxembourg, that is a case for concern. Luxembourg has taken an official position that cryptocurrencies are actual currencies. That is something concerning. Because most of us know the whole business world prior to 2011, possibly even post 2011, we don't know. We have always, many of the biggest structures have happened through tax havens. And all countries are aware of it. And the 3 known tax havens are Cayman Island, Luxembourg, and Mauritius, and patronized by each region of the world to ensure its economics is sustainable. See, the origin, it's a mixed view about it, but we must have a fair assessment about and idea about it so that we understand the downside of Bitcoins if in case it goes unregulated. See, all havens use or medium to pass through legal structures tax-free to ensure money reaches as an investment in the destination. That's how it happens. And all the nations have shut their eyes and they have agreed for this. because money comes cheap in the form of an investment, and large quantum of money comes into respective destination nations. So the bottom line they had was, even if it is bad money, if it is for a good investment, it has produced results, it has given opportunities for employment, it has allowed the economy to prosper, it has become part of the GDP's growth, then it is good money. Vodafone is one judgment which has towed this line to meet the realities of competing worlds. But unfortunately, the same tax haven will also act for bad money becoming evil money. Bad money becoming good money is an investment at some point of time for nations. But bad money turning evil is always lethal to a nation. And that happens through illegal trafficking, drug peddling, terrorism, worldwide prostitution. The whole list is the drug mafia, the whole list of activities which is nefarious. So if one of the tax haven is going to say we are treating this as an actual currency, then will it have an impact for rest of the world? You may not bring Bitcoin a legal tender status, but one of the transacting point has given a status of a legal tender, and that transacting point is a tax haven, and that transacting point has lot of structures. So what happens? So this is one area of concern, which of course after 2011, with the improvement of exchange of information, with the G7, G20 slowly tightening the nose, all sandwich structures are all disappearing. That is for good business. Ultimately, we should not be ending up where bad money becoming good money stops, but bad money becoming evil money continues. That is dangerous, absolutely dangerous for anybody. So this is one area which we need to have some concern. This conclusion Supreme Court takes on this point. These views are views of our court after analyzing the views of the regulator and the views of the nation, various nations. It says it is almost capable of being used as a real money. Let's call it a spade. Let's not try to be blind. And it makes a beautiful difference between merchandise and law. In law, it may not be a legal tender because RBI has not done it. But in merchandise, it performs some or in fact most of the functions of a real currency. This is a classic conclusion which the court has come. It diverged. See, only then you can bring it under. See, in stages, it has brought the control in a very methodical phase. How? It first builds the basis. It may not be a legal tender in terms of RBI's control, but it has, in merchandise, this is considered to be almost money. That conclusion it has reached at this point of time. Then it says it has all the triple effects because all the countries are agreeing to that fact. And it's the legal sense, the social sense. That was a contention which they raised. They said all this is fine. It's all bookish. It's all textbook because in legal sense, it has no legal status because RBI has not given a, and in social sense on day, see all that, these are all grounds we also take it in before competition law, before other regulators, where we say that if it is predatory pricing or if it is a competition of this nature, we say percentage of market share is less. And therefore, as on date, you can't. These are all defenses available for different factual scenarios. So they attempted such a position before the court to say, all this is academic, triple test, world understanding. It's all fine for us. But tell us today, does it have a legal sense? No. Does it have a social sense? No. Then why are you trying to meddle with us? That was an area which needs to be cracked. So it did give a mild hit to the RBI and say, what was your difficulty in not calling it a currency as on date? That's one sort of a, what do you say, indication, expressed its view, saying that very many agencies have said so. Why have you not taken a position on this? But this is the first. There are 6 stages in which Supreme Court has ended up closing the case on merits. This is the first step they take, the last bullet. It says, therefore held, the power of RBI to regulate still available even without the status of legal tender, as it has the other 3 attributes. See, this is the bridge I was talking about. In a Puritan sense, one can say, unless it has a social relevance, social market, it's being used, it's all as on date very textual. So why don't you keep your hands away for some more time? Supreme Court says no. Even though it has not been recognized by RBI as a legal, then it examines power of exchange, power of purchase, why, who calls it as a commodity. See, why do this commodity theory came? Why? Like stocks, like other assets, VC also is capable of being traded in future stocks, future commodity market. That's the observation by such future commodity agencies across the world. So they all started arguing it's therefore goods and merchandise, goods and commodities. No. It has not lost its duality or dual color of it being real money. It also has the flexibility to act as a commodity in a commodity exchange if you want. That does not eclipse its original intrinsic value of being a real money. And therefore, Supreme Court towed the line. It did not declare it as a commodity. It declared it in every sense other than its legal recognition as a tender. In every sense, it satisfies the triple test of the world understood triple test of money. It does something extra, cannot deface its original efficacy. It's what the Supreme Court has viewed. Now, they also they go to the precedent. We saw about what the regulators say. We saw what the nations understood, and so now saw Supreme Court saying. Supreme Court has come to the first meeting point. We will regulate it, notwithstanding it's not a legal tender. We are come to that. Then it starts examining the global precedents, how VCs are being understood across the world. So each one is saying property, payment interval, chosen action, chosen. It's neither a chosen action or chosen possession because it is not tangible. It says so many things. But what is important is the comment by ECJ, European Court of Justice. It certifies it as one under the category of non-traditional currencies, almost what India has said. A non-traditional currency, once it is legitimized, it becomes traditional currency. It's falling short of that requirement alone, says ECJ. Now, this is precisely what Supreme Court views post-examination of these decisions. It says it's like 6 blind men trying to identify an elephant. But it again tells RBI, why have you not classified this at least as other similar instruments? And it clearly says we can't call this goods or commodities, nor it can be disregarded as real money, double negative. Now we come to the second important milestone, which the Supreme Court is the last bullet. If institutions accept VCs as valid payment for purchase of goods and services, such activity will fall within the purview of RBI because it is becoming a unit of account in practice. So if somebody can buy and sell on Bitcoins, then RBI has to govern it because that is a substitution to real money. So this is the second important milestone, reasoning given by the Supreme Court why RBI has got the power to regulate. Then the third one is this: to regulate financial systems and to ensure payment system of the country to be on track, then monetary, currency, payment, credit, financial systems of the country. If Bitcoin starts moving into the market, it will have an impact in each one of these areas. And if whether it will be a parallel economy or an economy which will eclipse us, all that we don't know. So this is going to sit on these principal foundational stones of a monetary system of a nation. So how do you say RBI cannot? This is a third reason they give why RBI should control it. Now, fourth, they move one step further. If this is going to, so this is a perceived threat. They are not talking about an actual threat. Why we are talking of a perceived threat? Because FATFA and various agencies have already given reports to say this is sponsoring terrorism, this is sponsoring, and it is capable of giving exchange without interest. So if you allow this to happen big way without a regulation, without control, it can become a threat at a later point of time. It can impact. That's the fifth important reason they give. And these are fourth important, and these two are the fifth and the sixth one. The creation of VC is to liberate the monetary system from being a slave to the central bank and to operate in a manner prejudicial to private interests. And it will pose a danger to the very existence of RBI. This is the finding of fact which the court has arrived at. So it has come to this position to say RBI has a right to control by giving 6 reasons in support of the same. These are the 6 reasons for allowing RBI to regulate it. Now it goes into the next framework of regulation versus prohibition. So what is the difference between regulation and prohibition? If you ban something, it is prohibition. If you allow something and monitor, it is regulation. So the court puts a simple question. Have they banned virtual currencies? As long as the sender and the receiver is willing to transact on VCs, we have no problem. That is allowable. The problem comes, it puts these 2 points very critically and in a neat way. Please see the last 2 bullets, which are important. VCs would get crippled or paralyzed is not a ground to contend it is prohibited. You can't say this will cripple my business. That's not a ground to say. As long as it's going to be a threat, if it passes the 6 filters, in the process, if your business is going to be crippled, well, we'll have to give weightage to public interest, financial integrity of the system, financial stability of the system, and monetary control of the nation, monetary policy. This will supervene individual interests. That's one principle. More importantly, this is the bottom line. Last bullet is very important. As long as it is not converted into fiat currency, and as long as commission is not received under fiat currency, the RBI circular won't apply. So you can do trading with Bitcoins. We have no problem. Don't put an interface and use fiat currency somewhere as a medium of a unit of money. Or people who do that, if they are going to collect their commission in fiat currencies, then you are actually interpolating both at your level, at a business merchandise level. And that cannot be allowed as on date. VC to VC, fantastic. You please do it. Because they also want to see how it works. If it works, it works. So this is an important, this interface is what they are concerned with. Either substituting or interpolating or overarching of the existing fiat money. As long as that doesn't happen, circular won't apply, is what they have said. Then, very important, this is an important aspect which young lawyers should watch, the last bullet. See, all of us know delegated legislation. We have read it in the law college. We would have done several cases in administrative law and all that. Now, what is the role of a delegate in terms of a regulatory function? This is a defining moment. This judgment is a defining moment to say it goes through the process step by step to say when something is legislative and when something is administrative, and how functions can actually be intermingled or commingled. And the bottom line is, when the statutory creator empowers the delegate to do something, that empowerment is sufficient for the delegate to act. It's a clear, without ambiguity, this ratio is flowing out of this judgment. Absolutely clear. There is no confusion there. And it says you can test it only on the doctrine of necessity or expediency to ensure whether it is free from malefits, non-application of mind, or an irrelevant exercise. So one is competence, another is exercise of power. When it comes to competence, it says if the creator has authorized the delegate to do it. See, all these regulations, if you see, all of you would have read that many a times. These regulations will be tabled before the parliament for validation. In fact, the validation process is the number of our Supreme Court judgments are there. One process is only upon their consent it becomes law. One process is upon giving to them on their approval it becomes law. A third process is just informing them. Of the three, third is considered to be the least interfering, and therefore excessive legislative practices can be questioned more in the third. But in the first two, because they are approving it, the difference between first and two is almost diminished of judgments. But third continues to be a case of concern where in some cases you can argue a case of excessive legislation. But RBI, like any other regulator, all its actions are finally being tabled before the parliament for a validation. So it passes that delegated legislation test. So they say you can test it only under malafide, non-application, or an irrelevant exercise. Then, very important, it says we have to recognize the wisdom of an expert body. So, unless otherwise you are able to show patent absurdity. And finally, the last bullet is also very important. You don't think RBI, because there is a Payment Act. See, RBI is governed by 3 Acts. RBI, its original RBI Act 1934, then Banking Regulation 1949, and the Payment Schedules Act 2007. So it authorizes to deal and frame policies, even in relation to payment obligation, payment. So it's wide. Parliament has given all these powers to the regulator to frame. So what is your problem? Is the question. So non-application, they have ruled it out. Now the last two bullets is important. One is colorable exercise, another is malice in law. For young lawyers, you must know the difference. See, as we see malice in fact, there is something called malice in law also. What do you mean by malice in law? An authority who has the power to pass a legislation or a rule or regulation, as the case may be, does it with a malicious intention. He uses the power to pass law. Then it becomes a malice in law. And malice in law is a solid ground for interference under the administrative law. If you're able to demonstrate this law has been passed with malice intention, then court can always interfere. So they try to say that. What? This circular asking the virtual exchanges that we will not give you banking facilities, that was considered to be a malice in law. See, colorable is slightly inferior in its tenacity. Colorable is you are actually exercising power legitimately. The power exercise is not questioned, but the exercise of power results in some actions which transgresses the limits. Then it becomes colorable. So they have held both do not exist in this case because RBI ultimately is a regulator. And it says RBI can certainly involve itself in these 4 areas. And the transactions of Bitcoin and virtual currencies, yes. And these are the 2 important conclusions, which I said I should read it to you. RBI is a creature created with a mandate to get liberated from its creator. The moment it got created, why? Because, why they say so? It is empowered to do things even to the exclusion of the central government when it comes to monetary control. It is that autonomous, and therefore it has certain powers, shades of powers, which are certainly cannot be bogged down like you read it in any other regulatory enactment. In fact, I think I've got, yeah. So before that, I'm sorry, the last one, the takeover man. See, they showed one Society Registration Act and all said this is how it's. They said nothing doing. We don't want to examine comparative regulators. This regulator is one who, upon creation, becomes a super body even over the creator. That's the power of the regulator. And they also argued, see, ED has said ED will step in only when there is a money laundering. SEBI will step only when it is considered to be stock. CBDT can help only when there is a sale or purchase of goods. These are all transactions which await for action. But RBI can do proactively. That's the difference between RBI action and rest of the actions by the central agencies. Last 5 minutes, now proportional. So therefore, the first 177 pages deal with this. And finally, on proportionality, what have they said? They have said only one thing. Your circular says, one who extends the BC exchanges which extend facility to Bitcoin, we will cut the umbilical cord with the bank. That will be a financial disaster for any exchange. If they do, you have to suffer something which meets with those consequences. You can't say, suppose the same VC does 10 other businesses. So the Supreme Court said, what is proportionality? The remedy that is sought to be made should not be worse than the cure that was sought for. You can't give a remedy and say that this remedy will kill you and that's the remedy you are available. So this precaution of saying I will disconnect the umbilical cord with the bank, court found it to be disproportionate. Nothing else in this judgment other than this aspect on proportionality. It said it's not fair. And it relied on the following tests. When you apply the doctrine of proportionality, you should find out whether there are any alternate less invasive measures. If there are less invasive measures, then you should have resorted to. More importantly, it concludes this. The last 2 bullets, at least a semblance of damage ought to have been shown. See, regulation can be on perceived threats, but interfering with the right to carry on business with a bank, without a bank who can carry any business, that cannot be on perceived threat. That should be on actual. That is the difference. See, overall regulation, it gave the power to RBI. But when trying to exert somebody to say, you will be diverse from a banking facility, it made it clear. That can't be on perceived threat. That should be on actual threat. Only then it will be a proportionate decision. And to that extent, it has quashed the circular. Therefore, today, if Bitcoins are under regulation, they are under regulation. Therefore, RBI is always empowered to come back in whatever circular it wants, passing the filters of proportionality test. And if they find this to be one which is running a parallel economy or a threatening economy, then it's something which can step into and then act. But all of them, all agents, central agencies are recommending that more than it being regulated through policy announcements or regulation, it should be in the form of law. But why law has not been passed so far? World is waiting and watching. Nobody knows. See, India buys oil sitting in India and Middle East is selling oil to us. 2 countries are no way connected with dollar, but payments are made only in dollar terms. Therefore, whether Bitcoins are meant to substitute all this, we don't know. So All this churning has to happen, and RBI is also therefore waiting, like any other nation, to take a call. Thank you so much for this very, very, very pleasant opportunity, Arun and Aditi, for this. If there are any questions, I can.
Sure, sir. I think Aditi would have some of the questions that may have come from the participants. But at the outset, sir, I just wondered if I could be a little more provocative and say that that the Supreme Court has definitely not taken it kindly, or I think they have expressed disappointment at there have been only interministerial committee groups, and you refer to so many things that that governments across the world have looked at it, but somewhere there seems to be a timid approach. Where is the action? The government could have taken a proactive stand. The government could have regulated. The government could have legislated. But instead, you want to shoot from the shoulders of the Reserve Bank. If I could be a little proactive.
No. You can neither be proactive with me, not proactive. We know that much. We know each other so well.
No. I think the government could have been proactive.
I will take this as a legal question and answer, because some young people are there. We will make them understand. See, there is something called in law doctrine of occupied field. When there is no legislation, then Supreme Court can step into it till such time legislation is passed. For example, Vishaka was one such case on protection of women in the workplace. Similarly, legislation is not in place, executive can frame policy still, which is what we call it in our principle, doctrine of force of law. There is a difference between law and force of law. But these are all under the dynamics called, what is this? Doctrine of occupied field. Now, so whether Supreme Court could have, having said all this, whether Supreme Court could have stepped in to say, no, we declare this as a currency till such law is passed. Supreme Court is actually empowered to do, but it has also not done, because nations are now not very clear. That's what Supreme Court says. It's an elephant being identified by blind people. And what sort of an avatar emerge? In fact, one of the statistics recorded by the Supreme Court is, if you call it a store of value, shot up by 2000% and dropped. So can something be of that nature? So it takes all this. So either when nobody wants to occupy this point of time, because worlds are following this as a wait and watch, and India is also.
The doctrine of proportionality on which this circular has been struck down. There's one judgment which is one of my favorite, Jayalalitha versus Union of India, whereby the former Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu challenged the virus of I think Section 276 CC or one dealing with tax evasion in the Income Tax Act, and that was challenged on the basis of the doctrine of proportionality, the section dealing with prosecution in the cases of tax evasion. It was challenged 20 years after it was brought on the statute book. The High Court, of course, said that delay, the petition will not be struck down on the basis of delays. But I think in that case, one key point on the doctrine of proportionality, I mean, it's gone for, it's literally taken us down the history lanes and looked at so many judgments from time immemorial on this doctrine. And it says that the courts always have to strike a balance between the fundamental rights which a particular legislation will hamper, will strike, and the social evil that it looks to eradicate. If I look at that test, then the social evil, I think possibly that you referred to, sir, is possible terrorist financing and some illegal activities that are going on. So versus the fundamental right, you may say that I may trade in the currency that I want. I have a right to trade with my friend the way I want.
Correct. See, it's a two-step process which the Supreme Court has followed in this case. When it came to the regulatory control, it was very clear. A perceived threat or a perceived infliction to the financial system is good enough, and this is capable. Going by the records. But when it came to interfering with a particular individual or a firm or a company doing business, yeah, it applied the proportionality test there. It said that cutting the banking connections with the vendor, with the trader or the exchanger is certainly bad. So that's right. So they have put it in two. So that's why I'm repeatedly cautioning every listener: don't apply the second test as the principal test even for the first one. They have sliced it into two big compartments and silos. Yeah.
Aditi, you want to take over from here? You want to, the Law Street India, which is a corporate law portal, the corporate law portal run by Tax Sutra also has done quite a bit of analysis. Aditi, my colleague Aditi Bide will now pose a question or two to Venkat sir. Any other interesting tidbits from the judgment, Aditi, if you want to just take the readers and also maybe ask a question to Venkat sir.
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Arun sir. Thank you, Venkat sir, for decoding this landmark judgment before us so wonderfully. Now, the Supreme Court in its judgment did say that the very creation of digital currency or Bitcoin was to liberate the monetary system from being a slave to the central authority and from being operated in a manner prejudicial to private interests. Now, so given that the trades have been allowed and the curbs have been lifted, do you possibly feel that this virtual currency has the potential to replace fiat currency in near future?
See, I'm as well as making a guess like anybody else in this world. But the fear is there. They all say it has all the attributes of money. So if you're going to take monetary control and monetization value into private space, how will the economy then stand on its own? This is a matter of concern for everybody in the world. They are all, see, all these references in the Supreme Court saying digital currency, it is, nobody has given it a status except Luxembourg.
Right, sir.
But they all feel it is capable of that status.
Right.
So, well, we see it's like this, whether, I will put it this way, whether legislation should shape VC first, or VC has to evolve on its own space, at which point of time legislations and nations will take a call. It looks to be a situation of that nature,
Right.
which will take precedence is something, and they feel that the market has not stabilized that well as on date to get under a legislative control.
Right, sir. Right. Thank you for enlightening us, sir. Now we have a few questions from the participants, but due to the paucity of time, I would present just a few of them to you. Yeah. So one of them is asking, what data is stored actually in Bitcoin blocks?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So
what data? See,
yeah.
I mean, I could go. I don't want to be so technically correct or incorrect on that. But what it looks like from the blockchain technology and what has been captured, each block has capability to embed information, and one block is interconnected with the rest. And the transaction between the sender and the buyer through the distributor ledger of passing of keys will all get embedded into the blockchain to ensure that the Bitcoin transaction happens. This much is clear. Beyond that, if you say how it acts in terms of a technical analysis, I may not be very competent to answer.
Okay. Thank you, sir. So now the last question for the webinar. It is that whether SE is correct in saying actual pain should be shown before taking action. Isn't it some kind of reactive approach than proactive?
No, SE has done that. That's why I said when it came to power to regulate, it said perceived threat is sufficient. Whereas when it came to dealing with the fundamental right of an entity or a citizen, it said it is not perceived, it should, some semblance of damage should have been shown. They have sliced the two concepts clearly. And there is no overlap at all on that. No confusion, no doubts. Both are clear.
Right.
Perfect. Any Aditi, any other questions? We can take one more if we have. Else, of course, we can wind up.
Just a moment, sir. No, sir. I think this is all.
Sir, before we wind up the webinar, just one final question from me. Sir, as courts also are grappling with how to go about conducting hearings through technology and so on, do you think we are geared up, and how do you see litigation? How do you see litigation spanning out, the litigation landscape over the next 6 to 8 months as we traverse through this global pandemic?
Yeah, we have to catch up with the time, and when you see any commentary on global recovery, every commentator or critic or one who is in the social space makes it very, very clear. Hereafter, one who is connected with technology alone can recover fast post-COVID. This is a bottom line truth across. So courts must also acknowledge this fact and move into this new, and try to see we will have problems initially. Anybody will have problems. You're e-filing an income tax, first 3 years it was started. The refunds which you are filing is started. The GST returns which you are filing, it's the biggest gateway in the world. But therefore, can we say that we should not file a T-return? There is no way to substitute it. So we get to streamline it over a period of time. So, but we should move into technology. And hereafter, resolutions will certainly take place in a virtual meet only. And somebody in Luxembourg, somebody in Sweden, somebody in Netherlands, somebody in America, and somebody in India can conduct arbitration sitting in all the places and doing a virtual call. This alternative dispute resolutions certainly. Two, consultancy and advices. Can you believe we are running COVID? No doubt. Can you believe huge investment projects are happening in India? Can you believe 80% of the IT industries are functioning on full swing? Because SEZs and STP norms were relaxed overnight, allowing people to work from home. So anybody who is connected with technology is moving fast. It's moving, keeping pace in spite of COVID. So that's the moral we have to draw.
Yeah, thanks so much, sir. I think with those closing words from Senior Advocate N. Venkatraman, we'll close down this webinar. Thanks once again for joining Taxuka and Law Street India's webinar on decoding the cryptocurrency judgment of the Supreme Court. We look forward to having you back here. And Venkat sir, of course, will be back for many more webinars on new topics. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Arun. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all of you. Thanks all of you, please. Thank you.